Hello, welcome to episode 189 of the CRICKETher Weekly, which is being brought to you a little bit differently this week because, Sid, we are several thousand miles apart, aren't we?
We're not even on the same continent. Tell everyone where you are, Raf, because I'm back home in Wokingham, so my life is boring, but yours is exciting.
I'm attending a conference in New Orleans in the good old US of A. So it's been a very exciting few days, and I've been out and about, doing various things, eating beignet, which is the local delicacy, which is basically a donut with an enormous amount of ice sugar plonked on the top. And it's probably a good thing. Whenever I come to America, it's a good thing I don't live here permanently because I would be like 35 stone. So yeah, but also working very hard conferencing, Sid.
Yeah, what have you been talking about at the conference? What's your paper about?
Well, I
Quickly
haven't
tell me more
actually
about
given
that.
I haven't given my paper yet. I'm doing that in a couple of hours, and I'm talking about actually women's football, but I need to remember to refer to it as women's soccer. I'm talking about governance and the way in which the FA took over the running of women's football in the UK from the Women's FA, and how that was very problematic in a process that kind of mirrored the similar one that happened in women's cricket a few years later, whereby the ECB took over from the WCA. So yeah, I'm banging the drum for separate governance again, and we'll see how that goes down with an American crowd.
Awesome. Shall we get back to cricket then?
Yeah, let's get back to cricket because I have to admit, I haven't really talked about cricket very much over the last few days because when conference lots of North Americans, then you don't tend to talk about cricket very much. So, and I feel like also I haven't watched a huge amount of the WBBL over the last few days. So, Sid, I'm going to be relying on you to fill me in and to fill in our listeners and viewers about what's happened in the Women's Big Bash League over the last week or so. So, talk through what the table looks like at the moment because there's a few surprises in there, isn't there?
Well, it's been a good week. I've been getting up early in the morning, as you haven't been here, and turning on the television or turning on the computer and keeping up with it. So we've got four teams at the top of the table, really. We've got the Heat on 10 points, and then Strikers, Scorchers, and Thunder all on 8 points. The Heat had a win this morning, but the real surprise, I think, that no one will be expecting is that the bottom of the table is the Sixers. They've only got one win. Um, so, what's happened to the Lottie Magic, Raf? That's the question that everybody's asking.
Yeah, good question. I guess that she's been a little bit unlucky in terms of that injury to Alyssa Healy, which we
Yeah, Alyssa Healy
talked
was
about in
on.
a previous episode.
Yeah, Alyssa Healy was on comms today, and that the hand remains heavily bandaged. I mean, there's no hint of fingers or hand there. I, so I mean, it's obviously difficult to know whether she's, how soon she is to recovering, but it doesn't appear that they're expecting to see her for the rest of the BBL, to be honest. Whether she'll make the India tour is still unknown. But obviously, that's been a big blow. Susie Bates has kind of stepped up and it's in a bit of a rut of form. So that hasn't helped, and Ash Gardner hasn't really got going. It's been a tough start to the season. I guess that the real point is that Lottie can't do it every time. To expect her to reach every single final, there are going to be times with these tournaments if she's taking on three different teams in a year. There are going to be times when it doesn't all click, and maybe this is one of them. But there's still plenty of time left in the tournament. So you remember that first season when they had that Sixers are going vertical thing when Sixers had a terrible start, and then they came back and ended up in the final. So could happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that one of the things is that Lottie's been so successful at Vipers because so much has been in her control there in terms of player recruitment. And when you're coming in and being parachuted in as a franchise coach, that can look a little bit different. So that's possibly an explanation. Anyway, as you say, anything could happen the next few weeks. In terms of other England players in the WBBL, I saw on Twitter, I think it was this morning, I'm struggling to keep track of time zones, etc. An amazing catch by Amy Jones that was basically caused by a Beth Mooney error behind the stumps, whereby it should have been a relatively straightforward catch for Beth Mooney, but it hit the edge of her glove. And then somehow Amy Jones, who was fielding at first slip, managed to take it at the second attempt. So spectacular from Amy Jones. But why isn't she keeping?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting one, isn't it? I think that kind of incident really says a lot about it. It says that that Beth Mooney is not the best keeper in the world, and that Amy Jones probably is. As to why they've got it working that way around, we don't have any inside information on this. It's possible that Cricket Australia have told the Scorchers that Beth Mooney has to keep because they're concerned about whether Healy's going to be able to be playing on the next tour to India. It's possible that Mooney's pulled rank, but it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it means that Amy Jones, basically, she's been batting in the same role as she's batted for England. She's batting down at 5 or 6. She's playing cameos, and maybe that's a decent batting role for her. She's had a couple of good cameos. Her last one, 23 off 12 balls against the Renegades. That's really handy runs at the end of the innings. But you're paying an overseas player, a premium for that overseas player. You're paying a premium for the best wicketkeeper in the world, and you're not really using her in the role to which she's best suited. So I just don't quite see where the value is there. But as I say, maybe there's stuff that we don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of Australians yelling at their screens, listening to or watching this, Sid, going, "How dare you say that Amy Jones is a keeper than Beth Mooney?" But I think that particular clip that I've just been talking about does very much suggest that, to be honest.
Well, and Alyssa Healy says that Amy Jones is the best keeper in the world. So if Amy Jones is the best keeper in the world, she must be better than Beth Mooney. That's not to say that Beth Mooney is a bad wicketkeeper.
Shade on Beth Mooney from Alyssa Healy. That's controversial.
Well, shade on herself as well. She's honest about these things. So
Yes, which is why it's quite good fun having her up in the commentary box sometimes, as she was with her bandage hand earlier today. In terms of other England players, Lauren Bell hasn't had a particularly eventful WBBL, has she? So far, I think she's played one game, and kind of echoes of the Women's Premier League when similar happened to her. She was a sort of very high-profile recruit, really exciting for her, but ended up actually spending a lot of the time, I think, actually doing red ball practice with John Lewis ahead of the Ashes Test match, in which she also played a key role. But she perhaps thought that she was going to be going to India to play T20 cricket and ended up doing a lot of red ball practice. Anyway, so a little bit of echoes of that. Maybe she's doing red ball practice in Australia ahead of England's test against India. Who knows?
Well, I mean, that would be good news for England. I mean, it must be tough for her because she's basically warming the bench again, just like she did in WPL, as you say. I think what this is really kind of emphasising, though, is that fast bowlers who don't bat, sort of what you might call, with all the love that we have for Lauren Bell, a genuine number 11, fast bowlers that don't bat are a luxury in franchise competitions. So the two of the other overseas are Heather Knight, who's the captain of the Sydney Thunder, and Marizanne Kapp. So they're obviously going to play. And then Lauren's basically been pushed out by Chamari Athapaththu. So let's talk a little bit about Chamari Athapaththu because we saw her over in England at the tail end of last season, and she was looking good, and she's taken that form back home and then across the sea to Australia. She's made over 200 runs. She's batting at 120, a decent strike rate. She had a very decent innings today. She got a 50 v the Stars. She hit 24 runs in a Maloney over that went for 28 during the power surge as the Thunder kind of cruised to victory. She's really owning it. And I think the big question is, people are asking is, why doesn't she get selected more for franchise cricket? I mean, Richard asked it on the Naughty Child podcast last week. Why doesn't she get selected, in these franchise competitions more often? What do you think that is, Raf?
Well, she's definitely very much in a purple patch at the moment, isn't she? And I guess maybe she's not been as kind of excitingly consistent as this in previous periods in her career. On the other hand, she has had purple patches before, and you've got to ask whether there's something going on in terms of it actually being there being a certain amount of cliqueiness perhaps involved in terms of selection for these franchise competitions. So if you're in with the right people, it's partly about kind of who you know rather than what you do on the pitch, perhaps. And she is obviously
that's definitely the case.
Yeah.
Even in the age of the draft, that definitely remains the case. Sorry, go on.
No, I mean, she's obviously playing in WBBL now. It was a late addition, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And that just seems crazy given the way that she's batting. And you just end up thinking that players who maybe for whom English isn't their first language are kind of almost, maybe not consciously, but people do talk a lot about things like, oh, it's great to have people who really fit in easily in the team environment, and often that is just a cover up for we want people who speak English really well, and so I think that some of these players from other nations that aren't England, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa do lose out in that respect, actually, whether consciously or not. And it makes me feel a little uncomfortable about the whole thing, to be honest.
Yeah, it's very much dominated by, I mean, let's be honest, it's who you're dating, who you're mating, and does, as you say, does your face fit? Do they think that you're a good fit for their team environment, which often is like subconscious bias, massively playing a hand there.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You said you should come and present at the North American Sociology of Sport conference.
Okay.
Now,
yeah.
somebody
Go
else,
on.
another England player who isn't having the easiest time of it, shall we say, in WBBL is Bri Smith, unfortunately. So 5 innings so far, I think, if I've got that right, 5, 3, 1, 5, 1. Okay. So 5 innings for today.
Yeah, she is having a nightmare. And I'm going to be brutal about this, Raf. She has been ruthlessly found out by the coaches and analysts in WBBL. And, they've got the measure of her, and, she is being, pinned to the stake by it, basically. Let's have a look at her dismissals. Those 5 dismissals prior to today. LBW, Sophie Day, length ball, caught off Marizane Cap, length ball, caught off Megan Shute, length ball, LBW, Alana King, length ball, caught off Piper Cleary, length ball.
It's almost like there's a theme It's almost like there's a theme emerging, Sid.
Well, they've worked her out. They've worked out how to bowl to her, and she can't score a run, and she's just winding up playing terrible shots as a result of this. If you bowl a length ball to her, it comes in at her midriff. As long as you kind of bowl it in at her, she doesn't move her feet at all. You can look at the coverage on NV Play. You can go back to any game from Stars last year, pull up the coverage, pull up the videos, watch Bri Smith's her shots in those videos. It's like she's playing the floor is lava and the crease is the safe zone. Her feet are absolutely pinned to the crease, so she can't create length. And if you bowl, the length ball which is coming into her, she can't cope, and she winds up playing poor shots that get her caught or missing it completely and getting LBW.
Why hasn't that been
today?
Why hasn't that been picked up by the coaches in England? Why hasn't that been picked up by Myberg at Stars?
This is why WBBL is kind of the premium competition, because there is this ruthlessness, there is this kind of deeper level of analysis, there is much more discipline to the bowling, and it's a much tougher competition to play in than regionals because of that. So the analysis in regionals is just not at the same level, and so they've got her. She had a little bit of a better time today. She got 11 today, so she did make it into double figures, but it was off 18 balls, and she was just like, I mean, in all honesty, it was a terrible innings today as well. But the one excuse today was she was trying to dig herself out of the hole, which you have to do in this position, and she started to do that. But she was still struggling to find the boundary, struggling to score any runs. And then she got a short ball, she had a brain freeze, took a whack at it and got it easily caught, because when you're out of form anyway, when you haven't had much time in the middle, then that's what happens. So, she's having a terrible, terrible time. The only hope, for her is that actually being in that situation does kind of force her to kind of adjust her technique. And, maybe she will come back a better player as a result of this. But at the moment, she's suffering badly.
Okay. Now, moving on from WBBL to news a little bit closer to home. Well, closer to you. It's all very far away from where I am. England have got a new assistant coach, haven't they, Sid?
They have, yes. So this was news that was released this week, and there's been a little bit of a bit of a reshuffle in the coaching structure, hasn't there? So talk us through it, and talk us through what your reaction was, Raf.
Yeah, so they've brought in Alex Gidman, and they seem to have kind of quietly sidelined the other John Lewis. So obviously there was all of this confusion.
There's only room for one John Lewis in this town.
There was a lot of confusion because both of the John Lewises applied to be the head coach of England a few months back. And obviously the John Lewis who got it, and the other John Lewis had remained on as as one of the assistant coaches. But it looks like he's been just sort of quietly sidelined because there was just a throwaway line in the press release that said he's moving to be the performance batting coach at the ECB. So he's staying in a coaching role, but not staying involved in the England women's team. So don't quite know what's going on there. We don't really have any insight into the scenes, but yeah, an interesting one that, again, it feels like it's just a bit of information that they've tried to slip in there in the hope that nobody will notice. But
and who's
kind of interesting thing,
because I'm not going to lie, never heard of him.
Okay, well, he's a former county professional, Sid, Alex Gidman, and he was a teammate of John Lewis, as in the John Lewis who is head coach, a former teammate of John Lewis at Gloucestershire. I don't believe
in women's cricket in the past.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that. Yeah, I don't believe that he has worked in women's cricket before. We haven't come across him. I feel fairly confident in saying he hasn't worked in women's cricket before. So it really speaks to a frustration that I've expressed very recently on the Cricket Her Weekly, that it's a kind of a situation where, again, it's about who you know rather than do you have any experience or knowledge of women's cricket. So it very much under Lisa Kiteley, it feels like the ECB said, okay, you pick your assistant coach, and that has now set a precedent by the head coach drafting whoever he wants or she wants to be the assistant coach. Now, we were quite fortunate with Lisa Kiteley because she had a lot of knowledge of women's cricket, and she brought in an assistant coach who did also know about women's cricket. We've got a head coach who'd never worked in women's cricket before he got the England job, who's brought in an assistant coach who's never worked in women's cricket and has now got one of the most senior women's cricket coaching roles in the country. And that's very frustrating because really there aren't that many of the well remunerated, high profile roles. And you're giving it to somebody, again, you're rewarding somebody who has no pedigree in the women's game. And that is very frustrating. As far as I can work out, the role was not advertised. As far as I can work out, there was not a process, a kind of transparent process whereby criteria were set out. Alex Gidman was the best person for the job. It does appear to have been very much John Lewis said, come and work with us because you're my mate. And that is not how coaching appointments should work.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that just leads to, people, middle-aged white guy hires middle-aged white guy.
Precisely. Yeah. So it's frustrating. And maybe Alex Gidman will turn out to be a brilliant coach in women's cricket, but I still think that this is not the process by which he should have got this position. Anyway, finally this week, Sid, there's been stuff going on in Yorkshire, hasn't there? Tell us about that.
Oh, well, I mean, there's always stuff going on in Yorkshire, but the big news, as reported by the Daily Mail, is that Yorkshire are planning to sell Headingley. This old ground that has been Yorkshire's headquarters for well over 100 years, they're planning to sell it. Now, the idea is that they will sell the stadium. The stadium won't be changed. It's not going to be turned into luxury luxury housing or anything like that. But they're going to sell Headingley to a guy called Mike Ashley for £23 million. And then they're going to rent it back from him for £1 million a year. And now we know that Yorkshire are, in a deal of financial trouble. All of the racism stuff ended up not helping, and they've got deep holes in their accounts. But they've actually had long-standing problems, of sort of mismanagement long before the racism thing. But it feels really awkward that they've got themselves into a position where they're having to sell the ground to somebody and then rent it back. I mean, this is just, if I told you I was doing that with our house, Raf, I'm guessing that you wouldn't be best pleased. Even if I told you, I've got £23 million in my pocket now. Yeah, but you can rent it back at £1 million. I mean, the other thing, there's in theory, there's a buyback clause so that Yorkshire can buy the ground back from Mike Ashley at some point. And the price, I believe is in the contract. So the price that's been named now. But, is that going to happen? I mean, come on, that's not going to happen, lads, is it? It isn't, because what you're going to do is you're going to take that £23 million and you're going to invest it in your men's team in the hope that stuff will happen. And it's just magical thinking. I found myself in the really remarkable position of agreeing with Jeffrey Boycott, because Jeffrey Boycott has been on the news. People have phoned him up and asked him what his opinion is. He said this is a terrible idea. I agree.
Jeffrey Boycott having opinions.
I understand that Yorkshire are desperate, but this really feels like a very poor answer. And as Jeffrey Boycott himself said, look at Mike Ashley was previously the owner of Newcastle United Football Club. Ask anyone in Newcastle what they think of him. You won't get a good answer there.
But why do we care? Why do we care, Sid? Because Yorkshire County Cricket Club are okay.
If Yorkshire fail, then Diamonds are in big trouble. Diamonds, their training base is there, their ground is there. Yes, there are a couple of other counties currently attached to the Diamonds franchise that we don't know how things are going to evolve in the future. But currently, basically, in terms of like the money and the resources, it's all about Yorkshire. So if Yorkshire end up in even more trouble as a result of this, if they wind up struggling to pay back that £1 million a year, and then it could all go even further south. And it just strikes me as they're kind of kicking the can further down the road for a short-term cash injection. And it feels like a terrible idea. They're dealing with, a billionaire, and you don't get to be a billionaire by being a nice guy. They're dealing with someone that's been a ruthless businessman over the years. This doesn't end well, and it worries me for Yorkshire's future.
And do we know anything about Mike Ashley's views on women's cricket? Is he known to be a high-profile supporter of the women's game by any chance?
I think that it's fair to say that he's not known to be a high-profile feminist.
Okay. Good.
But perhaps he is.
Well, that doesn't bode particularly well then. Oh dear.
Anyway, on that bombshell, Raf.
Yeah, wrap up. Thank you everybody for tuning in this rather unconventional episode of the CRICKETher Weekly, and we will see you next week. Bye bye.
Bye bye.